Welcome back to Star Narratives Podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional health using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Martha Campanella. Hello and welcome to another episode. I'm so glad you're here. Today I'm doing an interview, but it's a slightly different format than what I usually do. I'm usually interviewing people that have a strong planetary or sign signature in their chart and talking about how it impacts and influences their life experience. And I like those kind of interviews because I feel like I always learn something about myself when I'm listening to other people share their experience and their story. But today I have invited a fellow astrologer on so that we can talk about the current astrology, what's happening in the skies. I'm recording this in April of 2020, and the whole world is on some form of lockdown or quarantine. And while astrologers have been predicting that things were going to get crazy this year, 2020, it's very different to predict versus have something happen and then be able to apply the current astrology on top of what we already know has happened. And so Julia and I have Julia Mihas, by the way. She's a friend and colleague. She has come on to discuss what we all are thinking about the current astrology based on the current world circumstances. And it's a really fascinating conversation. We had a lot of fun. A little bit of background, Julia and I have had the pleasure of working together for a few years. We both share a mentor, Jamie Kale Miller. Both of us did fairly extensive apprenticeships under Jamie. Jamie is a master astrologer in the Berkeley area of California. And after Julia and I finished apprenticing, we worked together under Jamie in her practice. Julia was working with Jamie long before I was. And by the time I finished my apprenticeship, Julia was already in the practice doing professional readings. And after I graduated from my mentorship, I also began working in Jamie's practice doing professional readings. And so Julia and I got to work together a bunch, and I have since started my own practice, but have kept in touch with Julia, and I thought this was a great reason to get together and have a conversation about what's happening. And so we had fun. I think that Julia gave some great tips for how to really work with what's happening, and I think that you guys will enjoy hearing it. So that's all I have to say, and I hope that you enjoy. Hi, Julia. Welcome.
Hey, Natha. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so excited to get to talk to you and get to talk some astrology stuff, astrologer to astrologer. And before we start, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to be an astrologer and all that good stuff?
Well, thank you so much, Natha. I've been looking forward to this all week. My name is Julia Mihas, and I've been a professional astrologer since, I believe, 2014, so a few years now. I'm from New York City originally, but now I'm based in San Francisco.
Cool. Yeah. So you and I have had the pleasure of working together, really doing a lot of work together over the past few years, but we haven't gotten to really talk too much over the last few months. So I'm glad that we're here and we get to do this. Yeah, and I wanted to talk about the current astrology and kind of get some of your hit on what's happening astrologically. And then we can just kind of talk about what we both see and what we've noticed and all that good stuff.
For sure. I'm getting my ephemeris out.
So, we've been talking as astrologers for many months now. I mean, I remember having a meeting in January, early January, where we were talking about the astrology of 2020, and we were all kind of marveling at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which I've been talking a lot about in all of my stuff. And I'm curious, like, tell me a little bit about what you're thinking about it now versus what you were thinking about it before this whole coronavirus crisis
Yeah.
actually showed up.
I mean, good question. The Saturn Pluto conjunction I've been hearing about for almost as long as I've been practicing astrology. Like astrologers, I remember Rob Hand did a video about it years ago. Michael Luton published an article in Vanity Fair back in the early oddies, from that decade where it's 2000, 2001. I think around 2005, 2006, he published an article in Vanity Fair about it. So it's definitely been something the astrological community has been focused on for a very long time, because this is considered a very historical conjunction that happens maybe every 40 or so years. And I think the person who's written some of the most compelling information and has looked into the historical correlates with this conjunction is Richard Tarnas in his book, Cosmos and Psyche. And he goes through different periods in history where this conjunction has happened. And I mean, these parallel events really bring to life, I guess, the gravitas of it. It's a very significant time period.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit in your words, and for anybody listening that doesn't know much about Saturn or Pluto, what is a Saturn Pluto conjunction, and why is it so extreme?
Yeah. Well, so, Saturn to historical and traditional astrologers, people from Hellenistic times, medieval times, he was the last outer planet. He was the very last planet that you could see without a telescope. So he represented the boundaries of the universe. That was it. So that's why he has all these associations with limitations, with boundaries, with endings. All of these types of things belong to Saturn. And, even he has an association too with mortality as well. He's the planet of age and time, because, mortality is the ultimate boundary we all face in our lives. But since the modern astrologers have opened up our solar system even further, we've discovered all these other outer planets too. And now Pluto, even though nowadays there's some interest in Eris, which is even further beyond Pluto, and people are starting to wrap their head around that new planet, but Pluto has been kind of our modern final frontier as well. And Pluto has a lot of kind of similar heavy themes that Saturn does. And when they're sitting right next to each other in the sky, which is known as a conjunction, a 0-degree aspect, that's considered when these two planetary energies are completely sort of hybridized and melding together. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look at the two sort of archetypes of Saturn and Pluto, and then look at them merged together. So, before all of this happened, when I was working with clients, or when I was on social media or whatever, and I was talking about it, I would often liken Saturn to our inner critic. And of course, it's related to our government and the things in our government, which have been very dysfunctional for a long time.
Yeah.
So many of us have these inner critic voices that are also cause a lot of dysfunction in our lives, right? Because it is, you said mortality is the final limit, and that is true. But then, like, to kind of move back a little bit, we put so many limitations on ourselves with this idea that we have to be more good or more better, or, not proper grammar there, but you get the idea. And then Pluto being that planet that is kind of about the things that we do that we don't even understand, or maybe we don't even know that we're doing. And of course, in reference to a greater, the collective, it's, the shadow of what is happening underneath it all. And so I have been fascinated to watch as these two planets have come closer and closer to each other, to see how it was relating to us on an internal level. But this seems so very external. So, what do you think about all of that, Julia?
I really love that idea of Saturn being our inner critic, because I remember Stephen Forrest said once, he says, wherever we have Saturn in our chart is where we face a blockage. And somebody else said, and I'm struggling to remember who I read this in, but that Saturn contacts in our natal chart can also show us where we crave something deeply, where we feel blocked, where we really want something. Let's say it's Saturn square Venus. Like we might really crave more Venus in our life, more relationships, more permanence in relationships, but we kind of feel blocked and craving it at the same time. And I think that's where the inner critic comes out.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good question for anybody listening, just to kind of contemplate is where have you been feeling a blockage? And sometimes it could be for the last, for your whole life, or just for the last several years, or certainly over the last few weeks, as our worlds have gotten smaller and smaller, and we've all been ordered to stay at home, is what are the blockages that are starting to arise, that you're starting to see? Because remember, Pluto asks us to look underneath the surface, and how interesting that we're all being so slowed down right now. We can't go do all of the stuff that we used to do. And so those things that have been blocking us or under our surface are starting to become obvious in a whole new way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Richard Tarnas, I remember in the chapter he dedicated to Saturn-Pluto conjunction, he was saying that these historical time periods are usually characterized by a massive level of contraction. Contraction is a very sort of Saturn idea. And with Pluto kind of adding a lot of fuel and power and intensity into the mix, but these cycles happen about every 40 years. So, they are times of crisis. It is a very sort of heavy thing to go through, but in the average sort of old age lifespan, let's say somebody can live up to 85, 90, they're going to go through 2 cycles of this. And this is just how it's always been, and that's just kind of the ebb and flow of history. Like we're going through a period of massive contraction on financial levels, on our lives, what we're able, the limitations are kind of crashing down around us, our freedom of movement, and along with many other things. But this is just the ebb and flow of history. After periods of contraction can, beget periods of flowering and periods of growth. And, we're just in the bottom of the cycle right now.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is that we do have a tendency to kind of awfulize, and I don't even think that's a word, but
it should be.
It should be, right? To the ship's going down, we've been trained to expect the worst, but we can also switch perspectives and really step into looking at this like, oh my God, what's coming next? All of this stuff is crashing to the ground, but there's always new growth after we've burned the fields. And so that's something that I find myself, I'm reminding my clients of that, and I'm reminding myself of that too when I slip into a place. So here's another question. I'd love your perspective on this. Is the last time that Saturn and Pluto came into connection was in the early 80s, and it was in the sign of Libra. What's the difference between that happening in the sign of Libra, for example, and in the sign of Capricorn?
Yeah, the difference, what's interesting to let's say a traditional astrologer might look at that conjunction and notice that both Libra and Capricorn are signs which Saturn is strong in. And which a reception could actually take place, where Pluto could be received by Saturn in both of those instances. Now, what that means in terms of historical impact, I'm not entirely sure, but I would say that when the Pluto and Saturn conjunction happened in the 80s, first of all, that was a time of the economy was not doing great then either, and it was we were sort of launching into a new phase of Reaganomics and sort of an upheaval of financial institutions. And we dealt with another epidemic then as well, which was the AIDS epidemic. That started around that time period. one of my mother's cousins was actually one of the first people in New York City to die from AIDS. And I think she was pregnant with me at the time when he was really sick in the hospital, and they didn't even know what the disease was, and they wouldn't even let her visit him and all that stuff. So that was a very scary time too. And people who are, much older than their 40s right now really remember it, and all of the difficulties that came. And if you look at it as being a more sexually based epidemic, Libra, I'm not sure, maybe Libra being the planet of relationships, love, which may have been associated with something which with a sexually transmitted disease. There could be some symbolic overlap there. Yeah.
Yeah. I had not even thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense that some of what we're looking at now has this feeling of more contraction, like you mentioned, because Capricorn is that, we have to get smaller. We have to, things like doubt and limits and even pessimism come into play when we're talking about Capricorn. But God, how fascinating to think that the AIDS epidemic started or really came into the big picture back then.
Yeah. No, definitely.
Yeah. So, in terms of making the best of it, what do you have any advice for people that are, we're here, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to get out of it. We're all in it together. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of what is so fascinating about this, is that this is not something that is just affecting a certain segment of the population. This is all of us. If you were talking to a client who was freaking out, what would you say to them?
Well, girl, when you said we're all in it together, you know what first popped in my mind was
What?
Saturn in Aquarius.
Oh my God, totally.
Which just jumped into that sign, and which is going to be dipping in and out between Aquarius and Capricorn throughout the year. So that, I think that, while Saturn is still dipping into Capricorn, we are still going to be managing this issue. And I especially think when Saturn comes out of being retrograde later this year, I think in late September, that's going to be probably some better forward momentum out of this issue. We'll probably be here for a little while. But I think that the ingress of Saturn into Aquarius, modern astrologers see that as the rulership of Uranus. Traditional astrologers see Aquarius as kind of like the higher form of Saturn, the more mysterious side. I heard Rob Hand once say, the Saturn that everyone wants to bitch about is Saturn in Capricorn, but Saturn in Aquarius actually has kind of a sort of a higher side to it. And that is, if Saturn in Capricorn is sort of government and institutions and society at large, and government is what limits you too. You have to obey the laws to be part of a society. That's a very Saturn in Capricorn. You need to have some limitations to have some more freedom. That could be a Saturn in Aquarius interpretation of it. But I think Saturn in Aquarius is about group effort, and it's a little bit more sort of the people than Saturn in Capricorn is. So I think that there might be some sort of new world order kind of coming out of that ingress in the wake of this crisis that we're dealing now. But another thing that, sorry, I'm kind of talking a little too much here, but when you were mentioning, we're here, what are we supposed to do with it? What can astrology help us to manage and handle and deal with this situation right now? I mean, the first thing that comes to my head is that everyone is stuck at home right now, and we are all now dealing with the relationships that come from our homes. So that's people we live with, family members, partners, those types of people. And that's all moon. That we're all in a lunar phase of our lives right now. Moon is being really emphasized quite strongly. So I think the sort of practical strategies that astrology can help people to deal with is to really understand their moon sign. What can you do to make your home a better and more authentic reflection of you right now? What can make your home a more peaceful place to live in? The moon is what we need to feel secure, and what we need to sort of feel a little bit of happiness and joy, and like we're comforted and taken taken care of. So I think really understanding our moon signs can be a really great, it can sort of be a great practice for us right now in terms of dealing with it, as well as lunar relationships, which are the relationships of family and home. And understanding our moon signs can be a great way of finding ways to cope with this.
I love that so much. Thank you. That
Yeah,
is,
your moon in Pisces, right?
yeah, my moon is in Pisces, and my tendency is to need space. So for
Oh,
me,
yeah.
being home all day with people is a little difficult. And I know that I've talked to plenty of people who are having the opposite experience, as they're feeling very lonely and
Oh, yeah.
isolated. But
Yeah.
but God, what great advice, Julia.
Well, moon in Pisces, what do you do to escape? Do you listen to music? Do you get into a fantasy novel? Because like, is there an escape route when you're just kind of like a little overwhelmed and you're like, oh, I can go to that place and feel like I'm away from it all, that I'm, in my own fantasy world?
Yeah, I mean, I have my office, thank God. So
Hmm.
I spend a lot of time in my office. And, I think the other thing that, when we're talking about homes, just making our homes a more peaceful place to be is, of course, I have a Taurus sun,
Mm.
and my moon is in the second house. So for anybody listening, Taurus belongs in the second house.
Mm.
Taurus is very much about comfort and, having your senses pleased. And so I've been taking a lot of care to, even though we're all home and the kids are doing art projects and they're doing all of these things that they haven't done
Mm.
since they were kids, which is very
Oh,
cute.
that's really
But
sweet.
yeah, but it's like I'm still trying to like keep it neat and tidy and do all of these things that really make me feel like, okay, if I don't leave these four walls for the next 2 months, I can do this. And
Mm.
that's just sort of advice for anybody. And I have on my website a free ebook that you can download that gives you instructions for printing out your own chart.
Oh,
And
cool.
it will tell you how to identify your moon sign, and you can look at all of these different astrological things. So if you listening have not done that and you're wanting to know more about your moon sign and the implications of that, and like, what do I need to feel emotionally secure,
Right.
and what should I be focusing on, that's a great resource.
Yeah.
Julia, remind me of your moon sign.
I'm a Sagittarius moon, and Sagittarius, is a sign that really likes to travel, really likes to move around, really likes to explore those horizons. I have dealt with years of illness, which kept me homebound, so I've already kind of figured out how to work with my moon sign. And for Sagittarius moon, I just try to learn more. I just try to take online courses, learn new languages, try to expand the horizons of my mind if I can't physically expand my external horizons.
I love that. I always tell people that when I'm reading for clients who have a lot of Sag in their chart and they're
Hmm.
broke. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, so if you can't afford, or in this case, if you can't leave the house, what do you do? Just like you said, start reading some memoirs, start finding some free classes online, like educate yourself, make your
Yeah.
bigger simply through the information that you can pull in and use.
That would be great for a Gemini moon too.
Yeah. God,
Yeah.
yes,
And Pisces
totally.
moon, Pisces is a sign, if somebody has a spiritual orientation and they have a Pisces moon or a Pisces sun or a lot of Pisces, then it can be a sign that could be really, really involved in deep spiritual practice too, yoga, meditation, exploring all those things. And for Pisces moons who aren't spiritually oriented, then it can be a very much a sign of altruism and wanting to find ways to volunteer, help out. It's a very compassionate sign like that. Yeah, do you do any spiritual practices?
Yeah, I mean, that's funny that you say that, because as I have had more time than I usually have, um, I have been getting really into, going back into my spiritual books, and
Mm.
even doing things like pulling cards to
Oh,
get
good
sort
for
of
you.
information about what is next. Because one of the ways that I've had to sort of work with this, and this might resonate with people listening, is because I have so much Pisces. And I think that, if you have a lot of water in your chart in general, you're going to be very tuned into the collective energy, just because water
Mm.
are so they're so porous. And
Mm.
so I've noticed that I've had times when I have just gone straight down the rabbit hole of panic and fear of like, oh
Mm.
my God, oh my God. Um, but, realizing that I actually don't have to stay there, and then sort of touching in with that, whether it's a meditation practice or it's just simply like sitting in silence or being in the shower, of really asking like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Just kind of
Mm.
asking the universe or my guides or whatever, what is the purpose? And I usually get a pretty clear answer. And usually it's very simple of, like, just ask for the insight to arrive, and then it does arrive. So that's something that
Ah.
you guys can mess around with. But Julia, I'm curious, like, if you could give like just sort of an overview of, when we're looking just at the elements, what would
Mm.
people with like fire moons versus air versus water versus earth, what could they do?
Hmm. I think that for example, air signs, a lot of my air sign friends right now, like, Gemini, maybe moon or sun in Gemini or in Aquarius or in Libra, air is an extremely social element, and it likes to be sort of interconnected with the collective in a different way than water does, but some similarity there. They're both very, immersive elements in a lot of ways. So I feel like all the air sign people are really, really will be very nourished, very benefited, very supported by being connected to others, either through like group FaceTime chats, from maybe joining online groups on different things. But just, we have at least the internet and our phones to connect us all together. And I think that that could be very nourishing for air. Fire, which is a very energetic sign, might definitely find its challenges, especially with this situation. But there are still ways of getting out energy, even in your own home. Like, fire, an Aries moon could probably try to find some at-home workout to do, and just kind of keep their physical body sort of moving, even if they have to be in place a little bit. A Leo moon, Leo being the sign of performance, might really benefit right now for finding ways to showcase themselves, maybe putting themselves on blogs or creating. Leo's kind of a creative sign as well, but maybe if they're doing creative projects, finding ways to showcase them to others. Leo's probably the most social of the fire signs that way. Earth sign, Earth needs security. Earth signs can maybe feel a bit nourished by feeling that they are as on top of their payments as possible, that their foods are completely stocked in the fridge, it's a sensual sign. So finding ways to kind of sensually support themselves, like nice relaxing baths, or putting maybe a nice oil diffuser with some really beautiful scents that can kind of just, the things that are very pleasing to the physical form could really nourish the earth signs. Did I cover them? Oh, water signs.
Yeah.
Water sign, different water signs, I could see responding to it in different ways. Like Pisces definitely needs to find a way to retreat, which is a little bit difficult based upon your home environment, but maybe that's just a little corner in a room where you can put on headphones and not look at anyone and just kind of retreat into a shell. Scorpio moons might feel enlivened by the crisis in such a way that they can feel like it bonds them more intimately with the people they live with. That even, Leo moons can kind of handle crisis better than any other sign. And they can find a way of sort of building some regenerative, very intimate sort of bonds through this situation. And then what's the other water sign? I guess
Cancer.
Cancer. Yeah, I mean, Cancer is the sign of home and family par excellence in a lot of ways. And it might be difficult for Cancer moons, especially if they have to be divided from their loved ones. If they have elders in their family that they can't visit right now because they're concerned of exposing them to anything. But finding a way to be as deeply connected with family as possible and making their home as homey as possible. Maybe cooking a lot. Maybe cooking a lot for whomever they are living with could be something that a Cancer moon could be very nourished by.
Yeah, I love it. Those are great examples. And I feel, even just listening to you give all of those examples, there were things within every example that I related to that I thought, oh, okay, so this could work for me. So, anybody listening, know that you are not limited certainly to what what your moon or sun sign is, but that there are so many ways to really support yourself. And I think that, there's a big emphasis right now for all of us, if we want to use it, of using this Plutonian energy that's so prominent right now to really look underneath the surface of what is happening for us during this. What is our emotional response? And like you said, Julia, like this is so lunar as well. What is in this this emotional landscape of ours as we've had to slow down and really look at the world through a different lens. Like what's really here now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this was great. I love doing this.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you can think of that would be worthy of talking about? I mean, one thing that I wanted to talk about was the Uranus, the fact that Uranus has moved into Taurus. Now, this happened in 2018. So Uranus has changed signs like 2 years ago, but Uranus in Taurus is very connected to changes that belong to Taurus things, which is around our relationship to food and the land and cultivation of the land and money. So, I mean, I think that Uranus is playing a big part in all of this too. What do you think about that?
I think the Uranus in the Earth sign of Taurus, as well as Saturn and Pluto, which were also in Earth signs, are showing us that Uranus is the sign or the planet of revolution. So throughout its time in Taurus, I think it's going to bring about some major financial and agricultural revolutions. That those two parts of our world are going to be changed really, really drastically, as well as Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn can kind of represent governmental institutions. So a complete kind of upheaval in these areas. Yeah, I think that it definitely is significant, even if it wasn't near the same degrees as Saturn and Pluto. Just the fact that it's in an Earth sign, trining that, it's bringing in those themes for sure.
Yeah, I've been thinking that too. And again, here's the thing for anybody listening: we always have the option to slip into fear about any of this stuff, but the way that we look at astrology is that there are places, there's always a side of dysfunction where it all goes to hell in a handbasket. But then on the other side, there's the side of integration where it is showing up and transforming in a very helpful and beautiful way. So know that like we're in a place right now of instability and contraction, and it's scary, but also just because we say the words, financial upheaval, it doesn't mean that it's going to be upheaval for the worst. We're not all like going down. There will be changes.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some of that right now in a big way. Suddenly people can't make money.
Yeah.
But if we were to have the very best outcome from this, what would it look like? And I always say this, and I'm very Piscean, so I do have a tendency to put on my rose-colored glasses. But, that aside, what if we look for the silver lining in all of this, even on a very personal, intimate level, versus the silver lining that could perhaps be happening in terms of our government and our school system and all of these things. And I encourage anybody to do that, to practice really looking for what is good about this. So Julia, I mean, what do you have to add about that?
I think that I'm kind of encouraged by Saturn going into Aquarius fully. I do think that where Saturn was going through Capricorn, there were sort of tests, and there were of our basic Capricorn being this sign of authority, and just kind of authority figures perhaps getting a little bit more control than they had in the past. I think that Saturn moving into Aquarius is a lot more egalitarian. I think that it could be kind of beneficial to society in a lot of ways, actually.
Yeah, I like that. And in case you're listening and you're wondering, what that means, Saturn moved into the sign of Capricorn in 2018. So you can even look back over your life since, 2018 until about now and really see how, where the limitations showed up for you. And how that felt, because I bet you everybody listening can think back and think, wow, this part of these 2 years was difficult, and it was a repetitious theme. It was, for me, I was trying to build a practice, an astrology practice, and Saturn is very connected to career. I also happen to have like a lot of Saturn transits in my natal chart, but Saturn.
Yeah, you got a Capricorn ascendant, right?
Oh yeah. So I had Saturn going over my ascendant, and then I had a Saturn square, and and I again have Saturn crossing my midheaven or squaring my midheaven this year. So it's been, for me personally, it's been a lot about having to take responsibility and get really practical and get really disciplined and see where my weak spots are. And that's what Saturn asks all of us to do. But Saturn in the sign of Capricorn is like totally exacerbates that, because it is all of those things that are related to rules and getting our shit together. And it's, we resist, it's hard. But I love what you said about Saturn moving into Aquarius, which it did a few days ago. And it will be like Julia, you said, it will be in Aquarius for a while, but then it's going to go retrograde. So it's going to appear to move backwards. It's going to hit Saturn again. It's going to hit Capricorn again. But by 2021, we'll be free. And yeah, I think you're right, is that whole theme of liberation and of, being more original and really breaking through some of those boundaries and limitations with a sense of integrity. And those are Saturn Aquarius things. I think that there's a lot of potential in it. And
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing, just in terms of present astrological stuff, Venus is going to be moving into Gemini on the 4th. Gemini being the sign of communication. Mercury and Uranus are kind of both associated with technological stuff. Uranus, because it's a very innovative and progressive and cutting edge futuristic planet. And Mercury can also be associated with, phone lines, internet. When you have Mercury retrograde, a lot of technical stuff and snafus happen. And Venus can be where we find pleasure. So I really see this as being throughout this transit, and it's going to go retrograde too in, I think, May sometime. I think people are going to be finding their pleasure, through kind of phone and internet connections, and the way that they socialize, which is also a Venusian Venus-like type thing. It's really going to move into that arena. And the retrograde period is going to be pretty interesting, because being a time of review and going over things, and Venus being a relationship planet, and we're all dealing with the quarantine right now, this is going to be a major relationship review period for us while we're in quarantine. Which is a good thing to be aware of, and, maybe if we're single and in quarantine, we're really starting to think about, like, what are my needs? Like, how can I build a good home and a good relationship with someone? What do I want? How do I want to date? And what do I want in my next relationship once this whole thing is over? And for the people who are in relationships and going through quarantine, it's going to be a review maybe in terms of communication, because that's the sign of Gemini, of, how are we communicating together? How can we do better? What are the things that need work in this relationship, and what are the things that are really good? And we might be getting a lot of phone calls from our exes too at this time. It goes retrograde on the 13th of May. Yeah. Well, we can't run into them. Usually I run into them, during a Venus retrograde period. It's just like I'm walking down the street and it's like, but yeah, this might be like emails and texts and all sorts of things.
I am laughing. That seems so like, of course that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. And of course, you guys fact check yourself on this, but something that my husband was reading was that, relationships in China after their big quarantine were really struggling. And so we, knowing, as we're listening to this, knowing that we have this Venus retrograde period coming up in May, start the work before. You don't have to wait until, right. You don't have to wait till retrograde to start really communicating. And, my husband and myself, we have really good communication, which has not always, it's not always been the case for me. A lot of my relationships in the past met their demise because there wasn't a lot of communication. But even he and I have come up against some interesting, quarantine butting of heads. And it's so natural. And I think that's part of one of the beauties of being in this place is that we are, it really is acting as a mirror, showing us our shit.
Yeah.
Whether it's the mirror is your partner that's not left the house with you, or whether it's just simply the emotions that are coming up from you and the stuff that we're having to look at. It is really valuable. And, also Venus in retrograde can be kind of interesting too. And maybe some sassiness can come out.
For sure. You have a natal Venus in Gemini, right?
I know, I do.
Wow. So you're going to have the Venus conjunction after it gets out of retrograde.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
That'll be nice. A new relationship cycle.
Yeah, that works for me. I mean, it's, I don't know, when I'm in a good place, which is more often than not, surprisingly, I feel very hopeful about everything that's happening and very open, just sort of like, okay, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And it's a nice, it's nice considering that from other perspectives and other people that I talk to, they're looking at it like the world is burning down. And, I think that's something else that's really interesting to remember is I was talking with one of my first astrology teachers, Melody Scott Zindel. I was talking with her a few months ago, and this was before all of this happened. But she was saying how this current astrology had not been as intense since the astrology in 500 AD.
Okay.
And she was, and I was like, why? And she was saying that we had the bubonic plague and the fall of the Roman Empire. And she said that even through that, though, even though there was all of this social unrest and there was this big disease and whatnot, that there were still people just living their lives, doing their thing. And I think that's important to remember for all of us is, we're in the middle of all of this upheaval, but we're still in many ways just living our lives and doing our thing. So the more awareness that we can bring to that, I think the easier it is not to slip down into, oh my God, this is all so terrible.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well said.
So Julia, if people want to find you and work with you, how can they find you?
Oh, well, thank you. I am just launching a website probably in the next week or two. And I'm seeing clients. I'm doing consultations with clients. I can be contacted through teleconference. I use Zoom software. And my website is my name, Julia Mihas, and it's spelled JuliaMihas.com.
Yay. And I'll link that in the show notes too.
Thank you.
This was so amazing. And
it was so much fun.
Yeah, I look forward to talking to you more in the future because of course we just get to like astrology geek out together. But I think that this was really valuable for me to hear your perspective. And I hope that people listening enjoy this and come out of it with a lot of new tools for themselves.
Awesome. Such a pleasure, Natha. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon, Julia.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to work with me privately or read more about all of the numerous ways to work with me, visit my website, nathacampanella.com. I really appreciate any time that you take to leave a review of this podcast on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps other people to find it. And of course, if you enjoy this podcast, share it widely and freely with those that you know and love. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.